Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sunday, December 20th, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about two main topics. I want to finish up the last lecture where we were discussing laws, and in particular, I want to talk about driver condition laws. And then that'll be brief. We're not going to take too much time on that. And then we're going to spend time on vision. We're going to discuss the different aspects of vision and driving, okay? At this point, all of you should have submitted your midterm exam, and we now move to the second half of the course. And of course, when we get to the end of all of this, sometime in February, you can expect a final exam, okay? I also want to remind you that I've asked your instructors, Guido and Tim, to get in touch with you over the break and set up times when you can drive. My hope is that within the next 2 weeks, you can drive at least once. I don't think it'll be more than once, but get in one drive time within the next 2 weeks so we can try to stay as much as possible on target. Okay, of course we're behind naturally because of the stops and the starts with COVID and of course the recent snowstorms. So we don't want to lose an opportunity to drive over the break. But Tim and Guido are going to be getting in touch with you. They'll work it out around their schedule and yours as to when you can drive once over the next 2 weeks. Okay, so driver condition laws is what I want to discuss first. We begin with, when we talk about driver condition laws, we're talking about the physical and mental state of the driver. Naturally, that affects how safe and effectively one can drive, okay? Probably the most common area in this category that we think about is alcohol and drugs and the effects of alcohol and drugs on the driver. We're going to discuss that in detail in a separate unit later in the semester. But for now, we want to address some basic things, particularly in conjunction with the law. First of all, one statistic I want you to be aware of as far as alcohol is concerned, and that is that it contributes to more than 40% of driving fatalities. So think about that. That's almost half of all driving fatalities in some way, shape, or form are caused by alcohol use. You should be familiar with the abbreviation BAC, capital BAC, which by definition is blood alcohol concentration. Blood alcohol concentration. And this is utilized in the eyes of the law, in terms of law enforcement and the courts, to determine whether you are affected by alcohol in a driving situation. The key number there for blood alcohol concentration in most states is 0.08%. 0.08% of blood alcohol concentration is what the law uses as the gauge to determine whether you're intoxicated or under the influence. There are two abbreviations associated with 0.08%, DWI and DUI. DWI stands for driving while intoxicated, and DUI stands for driving under the influence. Now, in many states, including New York, typically DWI and DUI are one and the same, okay? 0.08% is the benchmark that is used by most states to determine whether you are affected significantly by alcohol in the driving situation. DWI, driving while intoxicated. DUI is driving under the influence, okay? And courts, in making those judgments, are going to accept such things as blood tests, urine tests, and breathalyzers to come up with a BAC, okay? Now, I want you to be very aware of the fact that even if your BAC is less than 0.08%, you still could be charged with a crime if you're involved in a collision, in an accident, and it's under the determination of the law enforcement officials and the courts that that particular accident or driving behavior is affected by alcohol. So remember, the rule of thumb really is that if you're going to have any alcohol whatsoever, you really shouldn't be driving. Okay, the 0.08, yes, determines whether it's DUI or DWI typically, but any alcohol at all should prevent you from driving. All right, so really keep that in mind, and especially when you're under the age of 21, which you are. All right, so the tolerance level is much more extreme for drivers who are under 21 than older drivers. Okay, and as a matter of fact, in many states, it's anywhere between 0 and 0.02% of BAC, which impacts decisions about law enforcement and the courts in terms of drivers under the influence, okay, if you're under the age of 21. Now, there's another abbreviation I want you to be familiar with, and that is ALR. ALR. And ALR is Administrative License Revocation. Now, let me explain what that means. That's connected to what's called implied consent. So if you're a licensed driver and you're on the road, you have a valid license, you've given an implied consent to the authorities to be tested, to submit to tests for the presence of alcohol or other drugs if it is determined by the law enforcement that there's cause for you to be stopped. It may be that you've had erratic driving, you're speeding, or you're involved in some kind of collision. You are giving your consent just by being on the road to being tested for influence of alcohol and drugs. And the ALR, the Administrative License Revocation, in most states means that if you refuse to be tested, your license can be suspended. And it can be suspended in many cases for up to 90 days. So understand what that means then. If, let's suppose you're driving erratically and a police officer pulls you over, and the officer believes that in his judgment or her judgment that your erratic driving behavior may in fact possibly be due to the influence of alcohol or drugs. And it could be by, your physical demeanor. He or she determines that, okay, in his judgment. And thus, he or she wants you to submit to sobriety tests, whether it's field sobriety, such as, walking a straight line, whether it is submitting to urine or blood analysis. And let's suppose you refuse to do that. It is very possible, because of the administrative license revocation law, that you could automatically have your license suspended because you've refused to subject yourself to those tests. Remember, driving is a privilege, it's not a right. So the restrictions can often be much more stringent when it comes to driving than it might be in other facets of society. Okay, so the idea is that if you're not going to consent to these tests, then you may very well subject yourself to having your license suspended. So basically what we just did is we just talked a little bit about the law as far as driver condition is concerned. And that kind of wraps up the last unit, which has to do with traffic laws, okay? This is the one part, driver condition, that we didn't say much about. I just want to add to that, very quickly, some other things regarding driver condition and driver behavior as far as the law. Number one, distracted driving. So, of course, as you know, cell phone use is forbidden. There are laws against it while you're driving, and you could be subject to fines and having your license suspended for use of a cell phone. The other thing I would point out in terms of distracted driving that may, in fact, be a problem is if you're wearing headphones or earbuds. Okay, you also, depending on the state, you also could be subject to the law, to fines or having your license revoked if you are wearing headphones when you drive. Drowsy driving is also a driver condition law. Okay, and let's suppose you're involved in an accident and it's determined that you haven't had any sleep for more than 24 hours. Well, you could be subject to certain penalties because of that. You obviously have to be well rested. And of course, littering. Okay, throwing things out the window, whether it's cigarette butts or fast food containers or anything like that, could affect, the penalties that you receive, such as fines or, again, even depending on the extreme case, having your license suspended. Okay? Now I want to move to the main topic of today's lecture, which has to do with managing risk in terms of the areas of vision and perception. You know from previous units that drivers must manage vision, time, and space when driving. Vision, time, and space. And today we want to talk more specifically about vision. Now, I think it goes without saying that vision is the most important sense in the driving process. Okay, that's, I think, pretty clear. And one of the things we want to highlight today is the different types of vision, the types of information that you obtain from those different types of vision, and also how to develop effective visual habits. So it's not just enough to say that I have, 20/20 vision. Well, I need to know how to utilize that vision most effectively. Let's start with the term visibility. When we talk about visibility, we're talking about having a clear field of vision to be able to gather information and guide your motor vehicle most effectively. Okay, so I'll repeat that. When we talk about visibility, we're talking about having a clear field of vision so that you can gather information and therefore guide your motor vehicle most effectively. And your visibility is going to depend upon the distance you can see, whether it's ahead of you or to your sides. So visibility depends on how much distance you can see ahead of you or to your sides. So some terminology. The first term associated with this would be line of sight. Your line of sight is simply the imaginary line that extends from your eyes to the point on which you're focused. The imaginary line from your eyes to the point on which you're focused is known as your line of sight. So if I'm looking at a building ahead of me, the line of sight is from my eyes extending to that building. Okay? Another term is field of vision. And your field of vision is the entire area of the roadway and the surroundings that you can see at a given moment. So your field of vision is the entire area. Everything you see in front of you and to your sides that you take in at a given moment is your field of vision. So let's talk about some types of vision. The first type of vision that we want to define is what's known as central vision. And central vision is basically associated with targeting. So your central vision is what you target within what we call a 5-degree cone. So it's a very narrow area. We're talking about 5 degrees to the right or the left of your vision that is defined as central. Okay? And that's what makes up only 3% of a driver's total visual field. Okay, so central vision is a very precise, very narrow field of vision. It's 5 degrees on either side, and it defines only 3% of your total visual field. Okay, so there's a lot more area that is not taken in by what's called your central vision. Okay, and your primary visual function is established by targeting. That 5%, that 3% is established by what's known as targeting. Second type of vision is what's known as fringe vision. Fringe vision is what judges depth and position. It provides you with information about objects that are very close to your path of travel. And it also provides you with information about your lane position. So we're talking about area very close to you that comes under the category of fringe vision. It helps you to judge depth and position. Naturally, it's going to be hard for you to judge depth and position of an area that's far away from you. So we're talking about an area that's close to you. Okay? And then we have what's called peripheral vision. And peripheral vision typically is defined as the vision that picks up what's on your sides, your right or your left. And peripheral vision is established largely by color and motion. So, unlike, say, central vision, which is very targeted, your peripheral vision is not going to be as targeted. You're going to be able to see movement and color to your right and your left. Okay, and you're going to be able to get information about moving objects or stationary objects, such as a bicyclist or a parked car, through your peripheral vision. But you don't pick up all the details through your peripheral vision. You largely pick up color and motion. Okay? Peripheral vision does then give you a sense of your speed. So you do get a sense of how fast you're going through that color and motion on your right and left side. All right? And one thing that I want to emphasize about peripheral vision that's extremely important is that it is strongly affected by such things as drugs, fatigue, and speed of travel. The faster you go, the harder it is to pick up what's going on your side, to pick up that color and motion. The more tired you are, the harder it is to utilize your peripheral vision. And of course, whether or not you're affected by drugs or alcohol will impact your ability to utilize your peripheral vision. And just, one thing in particular, and we'll talk about this more in a later unit, it so happens that marijuana use is extremely detrimental to peripheral vision. Okay, studies show that. All right, so just keep that in mind. And then another type of vision, of course, is color blindness. And color blindness, of course, is difficulty distinguishing between certain colors. The most common colors that are affected by color blindness are red and green. And from your studies of science that colors have complements to them, right? So red and green are complements of each other. And thus, oftentimes, people who are colorblind have difficulty distinguishing between red and green. And of course, that's a big deal because on a simple level, even such thing as signal lights, red meaning stop and green meaning go, that can be obviously a problem. So there are ways to deal with color blindness. And some ways to deal with colorblindness are to pay attention to other cues, such as sign shapes, light sequences. Okay, so, red, yellow, and green, if you know how that sequences, that could help you. Other drivers' actions, number systems, such as with route numbers. Okay, my point being that if you are colorblind, that doesn't mean you can't drive. All right, you can compensate in other ways. And interestingly enough, I'll just give you a personal perspective here. I started teaching driver's ed when I was about, I would say, in my late 30s. And once I started teaching driver's ed, I started to realize that I have a degree of colorblindness. And it's funny, I got all the way to that point in my life and I didn't even know that I had any colorblindness. But as I was teaching students how to drive, and I would say such a thing as, okay, pull up next to that red car, and the car was green, I discovered that, and it's not severe, thankfully, but I discovered that I have some color blindness that I never knew about until I started teaching driver's ed. So that's something I've had to compensate for. And again, it's not severe enough that created any problems, but it's just funny that I didn't discover it until I was in my late 30s. Okay? Let's talk about some effective visual habits. Now, we know searching, okay, is important. And when we talk about searching, it means moving your eyes in a constant pattern, near to far, side to side. Your eyes should always be moving when you're driving. And active eyes helps not only to see things better, but it also helps to resist distractions, to reduce inattention, and it prevents a fixed stare, which is never a good thing when you're driving. Okay? Searching involves looking for vehicles and people that may be in the road by the time you reach them. So you're always anticipating what's happening ahead. You're also anticipating warning signs that detail driving conditions ahead. Okay? So, if you see that there's a traffic tie-up ahead of you, or that, the road traction is going to change, okay? There's, a construction site, whatever it might be, okay? And you also are alert through searching to traffic signs or signals that require your action. So visual search patterns, searching, helps you to gather information about what's ahead of you, and also what's to your side, so your peripheral vision. And in doing so, you identify anything that might require you to change your speed, your vehicle position, or may require you to communicate with other road users. So that visual search pattern, you identify information in front of you and to your sides, and by identifying it, it alerts you to how you may have to adjust your speed, change the position of your vehicle, or communicate information with other road users. So searching the whole traffic scene means searching well ahead. And in searching well ahead, what you're doing, and just from the standpoint of terminology, you're doing what's called maintaining a visual lead. And a visual lead, by definition, is the distance that you look ahead. Now, just to recap, in earlier units, I know we referred to what's called an aggressive visual search. So you're already familiar with that, okay? And that's really all we're talking about here. We're just revisiting what we call an aggressive visual search, which means searching 20 to 30 seconds ahead of you. Maintaining a visual lead is searching 20 to 30 seconds ahead of you. It's conducting what's called an aggressive visual search, okay? It also means being able to maintain what's called a visual control zone, which is 12 to 15 seconds ahead of you. Again, part of the aggressive visual search. And that 12 to 15 seconds means you're assessing actions that you may need to take to control risk. So that 12 to 15 second zone is what you can control, okay? The 20 to 30 seconds is what you anticipate. All right? So in that 12 to 15 second zone, you're identifying a place or places where you may need to steer off the road, okay, to avoid a potential problem. So you can control the 12 to 15 second visual zone. You maintain a 20 to 30 second visual lead so you anticipate what could happen in the near future. All right? So that's nothing new to you. Ground viewing is a term you should be familiar with. And of course, ground viewing would be searching the visual scene that's near the ground, okay, in front of you and to the sides. And of course, by knowing what's going on the ground, you can judge certain things. Number one, you can judge a vehicle's speed and any changes in speed, whether it's your own or somebody else's. Number two, you can determine other drivers ahead of you, whether or not they're maintaining their lane position or changing direction. Okay? Number three, ground viewing enables you to see markings or unusual road conditions. Okay, whether a road is going to start zigzagging or whether you're going up a hill. All right? And number four, ground viewing enables you to locate such items as, or such creatures as small children or animals that may in fact be behind or between parked cars. So ground viewing enables you to judge your speed or another driver's speed. It enables you to judge whether another driver is going to maintain a lane position or change direction. It enables you to see lane markings, okay, or unusual road conditions. And it enables you to locate small children or animals that may exist between or behind parked cars. And then we have vision that looks behind. And that, of course, helps you to avoid collisions when situations behind you may suddenly change. Okay, for instance, if a car is tailgating you, or if, you see an ambulance coming, right? That's your behind vision. And of course, how do we utilize our behind vision? Well, number one, you check your rear view and side mirrors to see if anyone is following too closely, to see if anybody's coming up fast on your right or your left, or someone is preparing to pass you on your right or your left. So you're checking your rear view and side mirrors. Number two, you're glancing over your left or right shoulders to check blind spots. And of course, we do that when we change lanes, okay? If we're backing up, if we're braking abruptly, we always want to make sure we know what's going behind us so nobody hits us. If you're approaching an intersection, you're especially sensitive to what's behind you, okay? Now, another type of searching that we mention in this unit is what's called selective searching. And the idea of selective searching is selecting the right information. Sometimes there's a lot of information in front of you and you need to know what to focus on. Okay? So, 2 steps in selective searching. Number 1, know where to direct your search. And number 2, know how to classify information into major groups. So it's knowing where to look and knowing how to classify. Okay? And in directing your search, in doing selective searching, there are important items, objects, situations, or highway conditions that may affect your path of travel. So you want to look for such things as vehicles, pedestrians, or other roadway users, such as bicyclists, that may affect your path of travel. You want to identify conditions that may affect traction. So suppose the road suddenly becomes bumpy, or there's a pothole, okay? Or weather conditions change, or there's an ice patch. You want to quickly direct your attention away from objects or conditions that do not affect your path of travel. So selective searching involves not focusing on things that are insignificant. Gathering information. So the more information you gather about other roadway users, the better you can make predictions. And one way to ensure that is to avoid surprises. A good driver avoids surprises as best as he or she could possibly do. And here's a statistic you should be aware of. A study of 11,000 crashes revealed that 37% of drivers in those crashes took no action to avoid collision. In other words, the surprise factor was much greater for them. Let me repeat that. In a study of 11,000 collisions, 37% of drivers in those 11,000 collisions failed to implement actions to avoid the collisions, which means they were not alert to surprises. An effective defensive driver, a safe driver, does everything he or she can possibly do to avoid a surprise. And of course, you and I know that it's not always possible to avoid a surprise. I mean, naturally, there are situations on the road, unfortunately, that happen totally out of nowhere, and it's impossible for us to avoid them. But most of the time, evasive action can help to avoid surprises, and a good driver avoids as many surprises as possible. Okay? So, how do we avoid surprises? Number one, we search well in advance for changes in the roadway environment. Number two, we observe the behavior of other roadway users. Number three, we watch for drivers who are following us too closely, who cut in and out of traffic, who travel on the shoulder of a road or in blind spots. Number four, we are alert for pedestrians, bicyclists, or animals. So let me repeat 4 major steps in helping us to avoid surprises. Number one, searching well in advance for changes in the roadway environment. Number two, observe the behavior of other roadway users. Number three, watch for drivers following too closely, drivers who cut in and out of traffic, drivers who travel on the shoulder of a road or in blind spots. And number four, be alert for pedestrians, bicyclists, or animals. Some other things to keep in mind in terms of vision. Changes in line of sight. Sometimes our line of sight is limited, and the line of sight is limited where, we see our line of sight limited when there's an area ahead where our sight distance or field view is less than required for safe travel or current speed. So there are things that can affect our line of sight. Off-road obstacles, for instance, such as shrubbery, signs, buildings, parked vehicles. Those things may hide intersections, driveways, or moving objects. So you need to be conscious of them. And again, this all helps us to avoid surprises, right? Traffic conditions. You may have a van or a truck ahead of you that prevents you from seeing far enough ahead. And you may want to, maybe change lanes and do your best to get around that van or truck, okay? You need to be able to adjust to changes in visibility. So there are things you need to know about your driving environment, such as the time of day, okay, when the sun is brightest perhaps, or when it's nighttime and it's dark, all right? The season. So for instance, if it's late August or September or October, you may know you want to be conscious of the fact that in the early morning or late afternoon, you may see school buses. You may have more small children on the road, okay? Daylight hours in general, sunny days. The sun glare can be very strong. You may need to wear sunglasses or adjust the sun visor if you're driving into the sun. If there's snow on the road, that snow glare in connection to the sun could be very, very dangerous, okay? Obviously bad weather. And, if the weather's really bad, if you're in let's say you're in a huge downpour, very, very heavy rain, or let's say the fog is really bad, or let's say that, it's snowing really badly. If you can, sometimes it's better to pull over to the side of the road, over to a rest stop, and wait until the weather gets a little better. Of course, you want your headlights on at night. You want your daytime running lights on during the day. Okay? Let's talk about classifying information. So you have all this information. How do you classify it? Well, there are major groups into which you can classify this information. And there are four major groups. Number one, signs, signals, and markings. Number two, roadway features, such as traction, slope of the roadway, intersections, changes in the roadway, such as potholes. Number three, off-road conditions, such as trees, utility poles, signposts, guardrails. Number four, motorized vehicles, not only cars, but of course, such things as motorcycles, mopeds, okay? And number four, non-motorized users, such as pedestrians, bicyclists, animals. So let me just repeat the four areas into which we classify information when we drive. Number one is signs, signals, and markings. Number two, roadway features such as traction, slope, intersections, and potholes. Number three, off-road conditions such as trees, utility poles, signposts, guardrails. Number four, motorized vehicles, obviously other cars, trucks, motorcycles, mopeds. And number five, non-motorized users such as pedestrians, bicyclists, or animals. And finally, the last part of what I'm going to do with you today is along the lines of establishing good visual habits. And a driver who has good visual habits does not do the following. So the way I'm going to review good visual habits is emphasizing the things that you don't do. If you have good visual habits, these are the things that you do not do. So that's the approach we're going to take here in this final component of today's lecture. So number one, a driver with bad visual habits does not prepare for stops or turns far enough in advance. A driver with bad visual habits does not notice traffic tie-ups in advance. A driver with bad visual habits often becomes trapped behind large trucks, slow-moving vehicles, or double-parked vehicles. Number four, a driver with bad visual habits is often surprised. Remember, you don't want to be surprised, right? Number five, a driver with bad visual habits is not always aware of a vehicle that's about to pass you. Number six, a driver with bad visual habits is often aware of his or her own speed. Number seven, a driver with bad visual habits oftentimes uses turn signals when they shouldn't be. And you will see that's very annoying when somebody has their right turn signal on and they're not making a right turn. Number eight, a driver with bad visual habits often has dirty mirrors or mirrors out of adjustment. Number nine, a driver with bad visual habits has fogged or dirty or partially blocked windows. Number 10, a driver with bad visual habits is often easily distracted. And number 11, a driver with bad visual habits doesn't always respond to changes in environment. I'm going to go through that one more time. So there really are 11 characteristics of a driver who has bad visual habits. And of course, we want to do the opposite, right? Number one, does not prepare for stops or turns far enough in advance. Number two, does not notice traffic tie-ups in advance. Number three, becomes trapped behind large trucks, slow-moving or double-parked vehicles. Number four, is often surprised. Number five, unaware of vehicles about to pass. Number six, unaware of your own speed. Number seven, using turn signals when you're not turning. Number eight, You have dirty mirrors or mirrors that are not well adjusted. Number 9, your windows are fogged, dirty, or partially blocked. Number 10, you're easily distracted. And number 11, you don't respond to changes in environment. Okay, folks, so that's really it on vision and how vision affects driving. Um, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you and your families a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I look forward to hopefully seeing more of you in January. I know a lot of students have been remote, so there are many of you I haven't met yet. So hopefully we can see each other in early January. And what I'm going to do then is I'll email, as I've been doing. I'll email you the assignment for this particular lecture later today. And I would ask you to make sure that you submit that to me by next Saturday night, which would be December 26th. Thank you again and Merry Christmas. All the best.